Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and his tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the phenomenon my whole life.
And I'm Chuck, an aerospace nerd and a tolerant friend.
We started this podcast because since 2017, there have been shocking revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed videos of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that we know the government has recovered non-human technology.
Or at least we will, once a late-night talk show host tricks a former president into admitting aliens are real.
It raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
And they may still be unlikely, but even if it's new science and not aliens, woo-hoo!
A very exciting time. Man,
Really.
someday we're going to do a live show and people will hear us hit that woo at the same time, where it's not like messed up due to the network lag effect. Oh, they were trying to say it at the same time this whole time.
The whole time. You know what? I actually come in early now because I've edited it so many times, and I know that we clip the audio every time if we post it. So I just come in early.
I love that.
Yeah. Anyways, hey, so about Patreon, I haven't checked the numbers because I've been a little bit sick. Oh yeah, FYI, I've been sick for the last 2 weeks. I know some folks know that, but so I haven't checked Patreon. But last I checked, we did increase our numbers significantly. Even of I think we gained like 5 free members, which is exactly what we wanted. We're not quite to that 30 mark where we get a Discord. But we're getting close. So if you can...
More importantly, can we officially now say, there are dozens of us?
We can. We can. And yeah, Arrested Development references abound. Yeah. So yeah, if you want that, trick some friends, spawn some bot accounts, whatever it takes to inflate those numbers. I'm just kidding. Right? I'll actually do that. I don't know. Whatever. Yeah, let's get a Discord made. I think that'll be fun.
Yeah. And a reminder, we have a free Patreon tier, which we're using. If we can hit a certain number, Chuck's going to set up some sort of discussion community for everybody to participate in.
Yeah. And so on that, a couple notes. Scott's friend mentioned that we shouldn't do Slack because there's no moderation tools. And also, I looked into the Patreon chat, and it's only available for paying members. So that doesn't really help us either. So I think it's Discord. And what was the other? Oh, yeah. Hey, Scott, where do we find the Patreon?
You can find our Patreon at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime.
Awesome.
Okay. Oh, no.
Can we get into this?
Right as we're getting ready to start, I got signed out of Google, and like my show notes are on Google. No, come back.
Oh, no.
Oh, man. Chuck will have to edit this if I can't get signed back in quick enough.
Yeah. Or I'll just start. So this week, I don't know if this week is going to be a little long, but Scott has lined out all of the presidents who have had some dealings with UFOs. And it turns out it's like all of them. So
it's not all of them, but it's a lot more than you would guess. So yeah, I don't remember when, but many episodes ago, I casually mentioned that President Carter had a UFO sighting. And a couple of people reached out to me like, wait, what? Like, talk more about this, please. Which I'd had a note in the show notes for a while to do an episode about American presidents and UFOs. We're going to be talking about that today. It's a weirdly fascinating topic. And it ranges all the way from well-documented, this president definitively was interested in this and talked about it in the following way, up to like wild conspiracy theories, like JFK was killed and stuff like that. So we're gonna, as usual, you can find all of my references in the show notes, but there are two main sources that I'll be referencing a lot. The first is a book by Larry Holcomb called The Presidents and the UFOs, A Secret History from FDR to Obama, and also a more recent Politico article called Which Presidents Have Seen UFOs? Yep, it's more than one.
Interesting. Okay.
So yeah, we're gonna be talking about that today. For any of you more hardcore UFO fans out there, I'm just gonna put a little footnote here for you. We are not going to be talking about Majestic 12 today. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. Long story short, it's one of those things where there was a huge document dump that was sent to paranormal investigators that purport to be the top secret memos of an ultra secret government group called Majestic 12 that were the people that were put in charge of the UFO stuff in the 40s or 50s. It's super complicated. It's super controversial. We're ignore all of it today, which cuts out a surprising amount of the presidential material. We've still got a real full agenda today. And that's after I was like, MJ12 is too much. So if you're interested, let us know. MJ12 may be the topic of a future episode. But we're not going to talk about it today.
Before we start, I have a question.
Yeah.
Why did it? Were there presidents before FDR who saw UFOs? And
for a split second, I thought that was your question. Were there presidents before FDR?
No, did we just not look up, or did UFOs not visit before then? Like what?
Sure.
I don't know.
The modern UFO era is regarded as starting in 1947 in the summer of the saucer, which was during Truman's presidency. The kind of current view is that UFOs didn't start magically appearing in 1947. There are people who do believe that, but most people believe if we are being visited by non-human technology, they've probably been here for a really long time. You can go back to paintings from Nuremberg and the 1500s showing weird things in the sky. There are stories of Roman soldiers seeing flaming shields in the sky. That stuff's all a bit more apocryphal by definition. So most serious scholarship in the field of ufology tends to go from 47 onwards. Certainly there's nothing hardcore evidence that any presidents before Truman had any interest about UFOs or flying saucers because it wasn't a topic before then. If it was called something else. So yeah, we're kind of starting from 1947.
Okay. Interesting. And asking GPT, it says that we didn't really have radar capable of tracking UFOs until 1942. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, it was kind of a World War II thing.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So speaking of Truman, we're going to kick off there. Truman was president from 45 to 53, which means he was president during the Summer of the Saucers in 1947. He was president during Roswell. He was president during the creation of both the Air Force and the CIA.
Wow. And in addition to all the other stuff happening in 1945.
Yeah, there was some other stuff. I don't know.
Things.
Don't worry.
Yeah, wow. That's a busy time. Busy man.
Yeah. Now, in the UFO world, we have talked about how in the early days, in the late 40s and early 50s, especially in the Air Force, there seemed to be kind of a tug of war in the Air Force between two camps about whether or not to take UFOs seriously.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that is still kind of true, but I remember you talking about one group would put out a report saying it's extraterrestrial, and another group would reassign everyone from that group and burn all the copies of their report. And
yeah, exactly. Chuck is referring to a specific real incident. That's not an exaggeration.
Yeah.
And if you're interested in that, you can go back to our episode about Arrow's historical report on government UFO investigations. Yeah, so I'm gonna quote from the Politico article here talking about Truman. One afternoon in 1948, Truman summoned his military aide, General Robert Landry, to the Oval Office. Landry said they, quote, talked about UFO report and what might be the meaning for all these rather way out reports of sightings and the subject in general. All manner of objects and things were being seen in the sky by people.
Translation. You seen this wild shit in the papers, Landry?
Yeah. So Truman told Landry that he hadn't given much serious thought to the reports, but he was worried about the possibility of new and underestimated threats. I'm just going to aside here for a moment. This is a common thing we hear about with people coming out of World War II. The kind of default assumption when they saw something goofy in the air was not aliens, it was Nazis or Russians. Sure. Like, that was the real concern. When something crash landed, the assumption was it was advanced tech from the other side. Sure. And then sometimes they found out, oh, it wasn't. And what the fuck?
Yeah.
Anyway, the president said, quote, if there was any evidence of a strategic threat to national security, then the collection and evaluation of UFO data by Central Intelligence warranted more intense study and attention at the highest government level.
Huh. So, like, even back then, they had the, well, it may not be aliens, but it's definitely national security line.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it goes all the way back to the...
Yeah.
Moving forward, Truman wanted a quarterly oral report from Landry and the Air Force on whether any of the UFO sightings presented any real danger. The fact that it was an oral report is interesting. Now, I am not a historian, but in the book, Holcomb talks about how Truman was incredibly security-minded, and it was really common for everything to be discussed orally and not written down. Or if it was written down, it was written down in the most like vague, hand-wavy, hey, do that thing we talked about kind of stuff. So interesting that on this topic, he was like, no, I want a quarterly oral report.
No evidence.
Over the rest of Truman's presidency, Landry regularly provided briefings, but as he later recalled in an oral history, nothing of substance considered credible or threatening to the country was ever received from intelligence. But the sightings never fully went away, and solid explanations never materialized.
So that's 1948 to 53 is like 5 years. That's 20 quarterly reports where they say, like, we don't know what these are. We don't know what they can do. We can't do anything about it, but they don't seem hostile. So it seems fine, shrug,
I guess. Right? And this is one of those things we talk a lot about, you know, the idea of Kremlinology and how we have to read between the lines and everything and kind of infer how the government feels. And there's a lot of different things you can believe about government involvement with UFOs, ranging from there is zero involvement, UFOs are bullshit, up to it's a secret internal black ops program that we've developed and are keeping secret even from ourselves, all the way up to it's literal alien contact. The thing I have always found the most compelling is that, frankly, the government doesn't know a whole lot more than we do. Like, even after all this time, they study it. And we don't know what they are. We don't know where they're from. They're up there all the time, but they don't seem to bother us much. Like, they've never shot at us. They've never started an invasion. They've just been buzzing us for 80 years. And I don't know. And like, if that's the case, I don't blame the military for being like, yeah, maybe we don't make a big deal about the fact that there's something in the air that we don't understand and have no control over.
Yeah. In risk assessment, that would be an accept, like, well, nothing we can do about it. So as long as it's not causing active problems, like, I don't know, keep an eye on it.
Now, we talked about some of the saucers. We talked about Roswell. There's kind of the big ones that happened while Truman was president. But there was another major UFO incident that happened. Again, quoting from Holcomb's book, In July 1952, Washington, D.C. became the site of one of the most startling UFO events in history. On 2 successive weekend nights, July 19th and July 26th, the sky over D.C., including the restricted airspace over the Capitol and the White House, was flown over by unknown objects and tracked on radar at Washington National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base.
Oh, you've teased this a couple times. I'm excited.
The Washington flyover is one of those big ones. It's one of those ones you always kind of want to keep in your back pocket when someone's like, well, why haven't they landed on the White House lawn? Like, they kind of did.
They have.
The events of July 19th started at 11:40 p.m. and continued until 5:30 a.m. The following morning, Albert Chop, Air Force and Pentagon spokesman, was alerted, and he called Air Force jets to be scrambled, but the objects would disappear when the jets arrived and reappear when the jets returned to base.
Oh my God. So they're just like messing with them.
It sure sounds like it.
That's funny.
The first sighting on July 26th was made at 8:15 p.m. and continued until dawn the next morning. On the 26th, the objects stayed and seemed to play cat and mouse with the fighters by hovering and then flashing away at speeds estimated to be in excess of 7,000 miles per hour.
Wow. This just like makes me think about like intergalactic teenagers right? Just like messing with us. And something about that just feels really good. Like, the aliens aren't any better than us. They still have teenagers.
Yeah, absolutely. The objects were seen by thousands of people in the area. They were photographed and reported around the world. People and politicians alike wanted answers and were exerting heavy pressure on the Air Force for them. Yeah. This is one of those things where it sounds so mundane to put it in print, but like massive flyover of many objects over restricted airspace, 2 different nights in DC, seen by everybody. Yeah, like to say that like politicians and people wanted answers, I think is probably an understatement. This was a big deal. It was in the papers. People were talking about.
I can't believe I've never like seen photos or heard about this. It's wild.
Well, unfortunately, the photos are not that impressive. They're white dots in the air. You know.
Oh, okay.
But yes, there are photos. People did see it. It's not one of those things. It's a purely apocryphal. Like it was widely reported at the time.
Okay.
At 10 o'clock in the morning on the 27th, General Landry, at the direction of President Truman, called the Pentagon and requested information on the prior night's events. Hysteria was building rapidly, and the president wanted to defuse the situation before it ballooned out of hand.
Diffusion, huh? I mean, yes, swamp gas.
Closer than you think. As a result, on July 29th, Air Force Generals John Samford and Roger Ramey held a news conference in an attempt to calm public anxiety over the events. It was the largest Air Force news conference since World War I, and it achieved the desired results. General Samford explained that the lights were simply the misidentification of stars, and the radar returns were from temperature inversions.
Of course, we regularly dispatch Air Force fighters to chase clouds and Venus.
Yeah, absolutely. And they show up on radar. It's fine.
It's fine.
The public and press accepted this explanation. However, on the inside, the explanation was criticized. The radar operators were furious that they had been made to appear as incompetents who couldn't distinguish a return between a temperature inversion and a hard target. Respected atmospheric physicist Dr. James E. McDonald from the University of Arizona felt the explanation was ridiculous and physically impossible. And even Air Force Project Blue Book director, Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, took issue with the explanation in his book after retiring from the Air Force.
Yeah. I mean, how mad would you be if you were a radar operator monitoring White House airspace and having the Air Force say you were just confused by a cloud? Like,
oh my God. I'd be so pissed. I gotta imagine that's not a job they give out lightly, monitoring the restricted airspace, you know? Like,
yeah.
Now, Years later, in a post-presidential press conference, he was asked, Truman was asked, if the Joint Chiefs of Staff had ever talked to him about UFOs. And he answered, oh, yes. We discussed it at every conference we had with the military, and they never were able to make me a concrete report. There's always things like that going on, flying saucers.
Okay. So Truman wanted it investigated, but never claims, at least, never got any answers. Interesting.
Now, I think this period of history is really interesting because what you're seeing is there's still an active tug of war over whether or not to acknowledge this stuff. And you see them make missteps. They will come out and admit something and then later have to retract it or say it was nonsense. You see the very start of cover up is a strong word, but certainly the idea of trying to make the public skeptical about UFOs. The broader concern was to avoid panic and get people to shut up and calm down. Way more than they cared about giving the truth. And that kind of makes sense coming out of World War II, right? Like public expectation management, you're still kind of on war footing where it's like, you don't lie to the public, but you kind of like, you make a big deal out of the things you want them to make a big deal out of, and you kind of brush aside the things you want them to not worry. This is very much something post-World War II they don't want people to worry about. Like, it's cool, everybody chill. It was just Venus or something. And like, oh, well, the government said it's Venus. And the government and the military at the time, and this is hard for guys like me and Chuck to understand, had a ton of credibility coming out of World War II. If the military said something, that was very, very good. For most people, that was an accepted answer. So I just find this area fascinating because it's kind of the start of that tension. And we'll see over successive administrations how they slide further and further into the deny, deflect, and discredit approach versus, I don't know, maybe there's something, like Truman very bluntly, like, yeah, we talked about it all the time.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a president saying that?
Yes. Yes. But, so I hadn't even examined my bias there. But you're right. When you said that it's hard for us to imagine, what I imagined was that, people saw the post from the government and just said, okay, well, clearly they're not going to tell us anymore. Clearly that's what they think. That is a totally different, but yeah.
And obviously not everyone did accept the answer, but I think it's worth talking about like what the majority of the public and the press and the scientific community did. They were like, yeah, the government says that's good enough.
Yeah.
All right. So that's Truman. What I like about these Truman stories, they're well documented. They're based on documents. They're based on interviews. They're based on his own words. There's no question Truman was interested in UFOs, at least to the extent that there's something unknown and it might affect national security. That doesn't mean he believed it was alien, but he wanted reports on it. He wanted to be kept up to date. Now, our next story is about Eisenhower. Now, there's a ton of lore around Truman and Eisenhower's presidency. This is a note about MJ-12. I already said we're not going to talk about that. Okay. So there's a ton of stuff about Truman and Eisenhower that comes from the MJ-12 files that we're not going to talk about. But there is one particularly wild story about Eisenhower's presidency I definitely do want to go into. And I'm just going to be upfront with you. This one is going to be a little harder to swallow, but it's such a weird, cool fucking story.
Does it come from MJ-12 or?
I'm not sure the original sources on it, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Cool. So again, quoting from Holcomb's book, he says, "There is perhaps no stranger story in all of ufology than the rumored meeting between President Eisenhower and extraterrestrials at Holloman Air Force Base sometime around February 11th, 1955.
Oh, wow. Okay. Let me get my popcorn machine.
Yeah, we're not pulling any punches on this one. No.
Yeah, right?
Holcomb said when he wanted to investigate this story, he started by going to the presidential library and trying to find any details about this day. And He says the president's diary shows that he flew from Washington, D.C. to Georgia on Thursday, February 10th, 1955, arrived about 4 p.m., went quail hunting until at 6 p.m. The diary then states that the next morning, Friday, the president went quail hunting again from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And after that, the president didn't schedule any activity until Saturday at 4 p.m., which means the president was out of the public eye for about 42 hours.
Okay, wake me up when this gets interesting.
Totally fair. Now, here's the thing. We have multiple witnesses who claim that the president actually spent Friday at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico at the same time that a UFO landed.
Oh, okay.
Now, we've got a lot to cover in this episode, so I'm only going to share one of the witnesses. Go check out Holcomb's book if you want to see the other two who also place Eisenhower at the Air Force Base on that date. But the first witness, the witness I want to talk about is a guy named William Kirkland. He was stationed at the hospital at Holloman. He said he was asked by his CO if he would like to be part of a military honor guard to welcome President Eisenhower. He declined, and his CO said, fine, you'll be on duty at the hospital then. Later, they were told there would be no ceremonies and forget whatever you've heard about a presidential visit.
I mean, maybe he changed his mind, but sure.
I also think that's probably totally normal. Like, hey, the president is actually making a secret visit. Like, it's just like, forget you heard anything. And, Holloman is a little unusual among Air Force bases in that even low-ranking airmen need security clearances to work there. So especially at Holloman, there was very much you don't talk about what happens on the base. Now, on the morning of February 11th, Kirkland was on duty at the hospital when a coworker asked if he had seen the disc hovering over the flight line. What do you mean hovering? Kirkland asked. And they have a little detour in the story where they make it clear that Kirkland thinks they're talking about like a Frisbee. I think it takes a while to figure out they're talking about a UFO. The guy says it was just hovering about 20 feet off the ground. Must be remote controlled. It was about 20 to 30 feet across. Looked like some kind of shiny metal, like stainless steel or aluminum. Why don't you go take a look? It's probably still out there. By the time he was able to go outside on a break, the object was gone.
Brutal. Oh my God.
I would be so bad.
So bad.
Now, after his shift, he was walking back to his quarters behind two Air Force officers who were talking about Eisenhower's visit that. Kirkland remembers their discussion in detail. Now, Chuck, I'm going to ask you to do the dialogue with me here because back and forth, if I just read it all, it's going to be confusing. So, Air Force Officer 1, did you see the president's plane?
Yeah, that Connie, which is a Lockheed Super Constellation, is a big bird. Came in to the active runway, but didn't taxi off, just turned around and shut down, closed the runway.
We were told to shut down the radars.
Why?
I don't know. Radar fouls them up. That's what brought them down. It's a rumor at Roswell some years ago.
Do you think the ones today were the same from Palm Day last year?
That could be. I heard there were 2 or 3 and one landed at the monument, but I only saw 2. One sat down at the runway in front of the Connie, and the other hovered above it like it was protecting it. After a few minutes, someone left the plane, walked to the disc, door of some sort opened. The person went inside, stayed about 45 minutes, then went back to the Connie.
Was it the president?
Well, that's what I thought, but it was on the far runway, and I didn't have binoculars.
That's... Okay, back to Chuck. What the hell? That's...
Right?
Imagine, I can't imagine being Secret Service for that. They're so concerned about, snipers from afar. They would never just let the president go into an unknown alien craft.
That was my reaction too, but I think it's worth noting, this is before Kennedy. And they were a little more loosey-goosey about presidential protection before then. It was more like he had some bodyguards. It wasn't absolute canvassing of all locations at all time. And they're on a military base. So I got to assume they're a little more relaxed. But yeah, absolutely wild. Hey boys, settle down. I'm going to walk into that alien ship over there. There's a couple other weird details in here too, right? Like, so first of all, he mentions the rumor that radar fouls up UFOs and that's what caused the one at Roswell to crash. That is a persistent rumor in ufology that we've heard for many years, that when we start seeing UFOs crash happens to correlate with when we invented high-powered radar arrays.
All right. Interesting.
And then he also says, do you think they were the same ones from Palmdale last year? I don't know what it's referring to. So yeah, absolutely wild story. At this point, Kirkland steps up behind them and asks, are you talking about the president? And one of the officers turns to Kirkland and says, it's not important. Then they covered their name badges and hurried away. But Kirkland saw they had wings and knew they were pilots.
Oh, interesting. So we don't have proof. That's just, but there are witnesses that say that rather than quail hunting, he was actually meeting aliens. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Now, the other witnesses make it clear, like we've got 3 different witnesses telling 3 unrelated stories that are all about Holloman on the 11th that all say Eisenhower was there that day. One of the witnesses explicitly says he heard a story that the president went onto the UFO. Another one just mentions that during the presidential visit, he saw a UFO come in and land. And the third one doesn't mention UFOs at all. He was just like, I was on the base and met Eisenhower. Do with this what you will, but I will say having 3 corroborating witnesses is a little more compelling than just, it's a story I heard one time. But it is a wild, don't blame anybody who's like, yeah, I don't think that happened.
Yeah. I wonder how often the president's diary doesn't match reality.
Oh, I know it happens all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially with Holloman Air Force Base.
Now, talking about wild stories about presidents and UFOs, let's talk about Nixon. So by the time Nixon becomes president, he's already dealing with this.
Wait. We're just going to breeze by Kennedy?
Well, here's the thing. Kennedy's entire presidency is one giant conspiracy theory. There's so many threads, and it's almost impossible to talk about. But yes, of course, there is a theory that JFK was assassinated because 10 days before he died, he sent a memo to the CIA demanding that they release the UFO files to him so that he could share them publicly. And 10 days later, he turns up dead. Now, it's based on a memo that a paranormal researcher claims that he received in a FOIA request. Nobody else can find the original. And the problem is every story about Kennedy, every conspiracy theory about Kennedy is like this. There's a tantalizing piece of evidence that 100 people have debunked and 100 other people have said is absolutely real. And unless you are an expert witness on the field of, old beat up photocopies of memos from secure locations in the 1960s, it's impossible to know what to make of it. So yes, absolutely. Kennedy was killed because he wanted to release the UFO files. Maybe. Why not?
Oh, cool. Thank you. We can go back to Nixon now.
So by the time Nixon becomes president, UFOs have already successfully turned into a taboo subject. Project Blue Book was shuttered the year he became president. From 1969 to 2017, the official line on UFOs from the government, nothing to see here. So officially, there are no stories about UFOs from Nixon's presidency. There just aren't. You don't go to the Nixon library and look up UFOs and find stuff. But there is one really interesting story from Nixon's presidency. Okay. So Nixon was good friends with comedian Jackie Gleason, who was well known for his interest in UFOs and the paranormal. Now, this is from Holcomb's book. Gleason's ex-wife, Beverly McKittrick, told Esquire magazine that Nixon took Gleason to see dead bodies of preserved aliens on an Air Force base.
Okay. Wow.
McKittrick stated that during a round of golf at Gleason's golf club, Nixon and Gleason discussed, among other things, UFOs and extraterrestrials. Later that night, Nixon shows up at Gleason's home and whisks him away to Homestead Air Force Base, where they entered a hangar in a high-security area containing a crashed UFO and the remains of preserved extraterrestrials.
Oh my God. Can you even imagine that? Like, get in, loser. We're going to go see some aliens.
Right? It's 2 a.m., Mr. President. What is happening?
I just told you.
According to McKittrick, Gleason returned home in a very disturbed state and eventually confessed to his wife what he saw. She stated that for 3 weeks after the alleged late-night trip to Homestead, Gleason ate and slept little, but drank heavier than usual. He could not fathom why the government continued to conceal an extraterrestrial presence.
Yeah. I mean, I would be pretty shaken by that too. But it's interesting that it sort of sounds like he's shaken by the cover up, not the aliens. Like,
right.
Of course,
he was already a believer.
Yeah.
I don't think it was world shattering. Yeah. He's like, yes, there are aliens.
Of course.
He speaks about it. What do you mean you're not going to tell anybody? You've known about this in the 50s?
Yeah.
Now, shortly after that incident, the Gleasons separated, and at some point in this time frame, the Esquire article came out. In a 2003 telephone interview, she stated that when the article was published, Gleason called her and was very upset that she told the Esquire the Nixon UFO story, and whatever relationship they still had was absolutely over. However, he never denied her account of his late-night trip with the president.
Yeah, interesting. So, like, it's a fun story. And like, I don't know my history that well, but something about Nixon makes me feel like it could have been a thing.
Absolutely. Right? Like, if you heard a story about Carter or Eisenhower or Truman or any of these former like military dudes just kind of going rogue and bringing a civilian into a highly classified facility in the middle of the night, I don't buy it for a second. Nixon absolutely seems like the kind of guy who would kind of go rogue, like, bring my buddy in to show him the aliens. What are you going to say? No?
Yeah. Yeah. Trump too. 100%. That would happen. So here's my question. If you were a president and you were going to go rogue, who would you take and what would you show them?
That's a tricky question because I can't imagine what my life would be like if I ended up in a spot where I'm president. You know, like I'm thinking of people in my life today, and those wouldn't be the people in my life if I was an American president. Not, you know, like
Annie wouldn't be his first wife.
If you were a completely different person, what would you do? What? I don't know.
I don't know. I think I'd maintain my friendships. Just be a little bit weirder.
It's a little bit weirder. I like that. All right. So let's fast forward a little bit. Now, the last two stories are a little more apocryphal, a little more rumor based. They're fun. They're exciting stories. Who doesn't like the idea that Eisenhower secretly met with aliens in the 50s? Yeah, it's delightful. I love it. Nixon going rogue and taking his comedy buddy to see the bodies? Sure. Why not? Sign me up. We're going to dip back now into stories that are a little more grounded in reality. These are documented. These are things that actually happen.
Okay.
Now, Gerald Ford never mentioned UFOs after becoming president, but he was pretty outspoken about them while he was serving in Congress as a representative from Michigan. From Holcomb's book again. Over a period of 6 days in March 1966, UFOs were seen by hundreds of people in southern Michigan and Ohio in an area between and around Toledo and Detroit. On March 14th, in the early morning darkness, a number of police officers from Washtenaw, Livingston, and Monroe counties viewed objects that darted about the sky, moving very fast and making sharp turns. The objects would dive, hover, and shoot straight up while changing colors. Citizens were also seeing the objects and were calling the various police departments to report the sightings. Monroe County Sheriff's Office contacted Selfridge Air Force Base, and was told that the base had uncorrelated targets over Lake Erie.
So this sounds like the DC sighting that was just like really big.
Yeah, it's another big sighting for sure. Now, like I said, we got a lot to cover today, so I'm going to kind of blaze through a few supporting quotes here. 2 police officers saw 3 or 4 top-like objects dart about the sky, glowing red, white, and green. Another patrolman spotted an object in the sky and reported that the object, flashing red and green, hovered over a car, then was joined by another and shot up into the night sky. The county sheriff ordered all deputies to the scene, and they later chased an object, but were unable to catch up to it. A local, Frank Manor, and his family saw the lights from their home and went to investigate. An object appeared to touch down in a nearby swamp. Manor stated, "I got within 500 yards of the thing and it looked pyramid-shaped. I've never seen anything like it." Well, you've seen a pyramid. Manor said the object appeared to be about the size of a car. It had a haze under it as it hovered, and then rose to treetop level, and then came back down while changing colors. The object emitted a noise like a very high-pitched siren. Manor's wife called the police. Police Chief Taylor and Patrolman Lee came to the scene and heard the sounds and saw the object in the sky around 10:30 p.m. Taylor watched the object through binoculars, pulsating red with a light on each end. A deputy sheriff also observed the object. Quote, "It looked like an arc. It was round. We turned around and started following it through Dexter for 5 miles. It was heading west, and we stopped. We lost it in the trees. Either the lights went off, or it took off with a tremendous burst of speed. It was about 1,500 feet above the ground, and it moved along at about 100 miles per hour. We were doing 70 before losing it."
Okay. So a bunch of like credible witnesses, good statements from civilians, and also a couple of cops reported it.
Yeah. Now, Project Blue Book sent one of their consultants, J. Allen Hynek, to investigate. Hynek, by the way, is one of the guys we haven't talked about a lot on the show. The short version about Hynek is he was one of the main investigators for Blue Book and one of the ones who was involved in kind of the debunking efforts. And he later soured on the whole thing and became one of the biggest like UFO advocates. So he's definitely someone who went from a skeptic to a believer. And a big part of it, he has said in interviews and books, is because Blue Book turned into a cover-up rather than investigation. But at the time, he was still working for Blue Book. So he was sent out to investigate. Hynek says he was pressured by Major Hector Quintilla, the head of Blue Book, to come up with a debunking press statement about what the sightings really were before the population got too excited.
Yeah, these are kind of depressing, but frustrating.
It's one of those things like I really want stories about government debunking and stigmatizing efforts to be urban legends and myths, but it's really well documented. Like there's overwhelming evidence that this is actually what was happening. Like there's no doubt that the government was actively trying to debunk and discredit UFOs at this point.
Yeah.
Now, at the news conference, after studying the sightings and going to the Manor farm to view the site where the Manor said the UFO landed, Hynek opined that swamp gas may be the cause of some of the sightings.
Wait, so this is the actual swamp gas thing?
This is the one. This is why it became a joke. Now, he repeatedly stated that swamp gas was a possible explanation for only a few of the sightings. Hynek's admonition that swamp gas was a possible explanation for only a few of the sightings was overlooked, and his comments were ridiculed by citizens and scientists alike. The swamp gas fiasco caused worldwide outrage and brought Representative Gerald Ford of Michigan into the controversy. In 1966, Ford made several passionate radio broadcasts to his constituents that he was pursuing a congressional investigation into the Michigan sightings. Now, all of this public pressure eventually led the Air Force to set up the Condon Commission as an impartial study.
Oh, wait, that was Condon was the one who said who got caught saying he'd already made up his mind before the investigation started.
Absolutely. A memo leaked from an assistant dean of the university's graduate program reassuring administrators that the study would find no reality to the observations, and Condon himself said that he thought the subject was nonsense, but, quote, I'm not supposed to reach that conclusion for another year.
Wide open. So it's interesting. So before Ford was president, he was pissed about swamp gas and Air Force cover-ups, but afterwards he kind of shut up. It kind of sounds like in the beginning, though, he was kind of the Tim Burchett of his day.
Right? Doesn't it sound like that? Like it's the same thing. Yeah. It's a cover-up. They won't tell us the truth. I'm angry. Yeah. I wish I could go back and find these radio broadcasts because I bet there's a notable similarity between
I bet.
the way that Burchett talks.
Yeah, maybe Burchett's just reading from his book. Let's see Burchett going for president in like 4 years.
Now, we mentioned at the start of this that kind of the instigation for this episode was me casually mentioning that President Carter had a UFO sighting. So let's talk about that. During the presidential campaign of 1976, President Carter was forthcoming about his belief that he had seen a UFO in October 1969. I want to emphasize that. It's not just that he saw a UFO. It's that he was talking about it during his campaign, which you would imagine most people would tell him not to talk about this, but he was pretty outspoken about it. Now, he described waiting outside for a Lions Club meeting in Leary, Georgia to begin at about 7:30 p.m. when he spotted what he called the darndest thing I've ever seen in the sky. One of Carter's club colleagues pointed to the horizon and said, "Look, over in the west." And the men watched a bright light appear to come toward them and then move rapidly away. He said it was about 30 degrees above the horizon and looked about as large as the moon. It got smaller and changed to a reddish color and then got larger again, Carter recalled. At various times, the luminous object appeared more blue, at other times more reddish. He estimated the object was perhaps 300 to 1,000 yards away, set against the star-filled night sky, and the group watched it for about 10 to 12 minutes before it seemed to move away and disappear for good.
That's crazy. How did he react to this?
He campaigned on.
Okay.
And in an interview he said, quote, "One thing is for sure, I'll never make fun of people who say they've seen unidentified objects in the sky. I become president, I will make every piece of information this country has about UFO sightings available to the public and the scientists."
So, I mean, he did become president, and we still have a podcast. So what happened?
After winning the presidency, Carter backed away from this pledge, saying that the release of some information might have defense implications and pose a threat to national security.
Okay, all right.
Now, the fun, like, UFO land rumor is that he asked for UFO info and was told by the CIA director that he had no need to know this information. Chuck, do you know who the CIA director was?
I do not.
George H.W. Bush.
No way. I had no idea that he was a CIA director. That's fascinating. It makes me think that we're probably not going to hear a lot of stories about Bush Sr.'s UFO interactions. Probably.
Literally none.
Pretty tight to the chest. All right.
Yeah, it knows how to keep a secret.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, it sounds like Carter was ready for disclosure, but was denied by the CIA. So fascinating.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Let's talk about Ronald Reagan.
Okay.
While serving as governor, Reagan had encountered a UFO while flying in a Cessna Citation near Bakersfield, California in 1974. Reagan's pilot. That is two, Carter and Reagan.
But what about who've actually
who had documented public statements. Yeah, like Eisenhower, I don't think counts. Reagan's pilot that night, Bill Painter, later recounted noticing a strange object several hundred yards behind their plane. It was a fairly steady light up until it began to accelerate, and then it appeared to elongate. Then the light took off. It went up at a 45-degree angle and a high rate of speed. Everyone on the plane was surprised, he said. The UFO went from a normal cruise speed to a fantastic speed instantly. If you give an airplane power, it'll accelerate, but not like a hot rod. That's what this was. Reagan was wowed. It went straight up into the heavens.
It's so cool that, like, I don't know. I'm still thinking about two presidents that have, like, admitted or said publicly that they've seen UFOs. Yeah. I didn't know.
Two more than you would have guessed, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, here's where the story gets fun. So that part's documented. We're going to go a little off the rails now with this next part. According to famous actress Lucille Ball, that wasn't even the first time he saw a UFO. Lucille Ball said that Reagan had confided in her that on the way to a party in LA with his wife, Nancy, they encountered a UFO on the ground blocking their car. An alien exited the craft and addressed Reagan telepathically with one message: leave acting and go into politics.
There's an origin story right there.
Now, here's where it gets wild. Both Lucille Ball and another entertainer, Steve Allen, confirmed that when the Reagans appeared at the party late, they looked shaken, and Reagan said they saw a UFO.
Yeah, that's so weird, but also amazing.
I will say, if we find out that we have the aliens to blame for Reaganomics and the state of the GOP, I'm going to be fucking pissed. Way more than about abductions, weirdly.
Yeah, I mean, do they do this for every president?
Who knows, right? Now, that story is a bit apocryphal, obviously. Who knows if it's true? But these next two, these are real quotes, the real things that happen. Mikhail Gorbachev, the former leader of the Soviet Union, shared a story about a conversation he had with Reagan on a private walk in Lake Geneva. Reagan asked, "What would you do if the United States were suddenly attacked by someone from outer space? Would you help us?" And I said, "No doubt about it." And he said, "We too." So that's interesting.
Wow. I mean, it's kind of beautiful that even during the height of the Cold War, the USSR would help us out if there was some external threat like that.
That's a lovely takeaway. But I would love to know how Gorbachev reacted to this. Was this a meeting of two peers who both knew the reality of the UFO thing and were having a frank discussion about a real possibility? Or was this Reagan just bringing it up out of nowhere and Gorbachev's like, yeah, okay, Ronnie. No,
Yeah.
Now, later, in a speech to the United Nations, Reagan said this. This is one of the most famous, presidents and UFOs thing that people talk about. "Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our people than war and the threat of war?"
The analogy is a bit of a stretch, but I like the sentiment.
Sentiment's good. Yeah.
Yeah. I really wonder if one of the speechwriters winged that in on a dare, or if Reagan had to lean on them to add it in.
It's funny you say that. So I knew he had said that, and I always thought the same thing. There was a little line in the Politico article. He said, "Reagan's frequent references to alien invasions did not sit well with all of his staff. According to Reagan biographer Lou Cannon, National Security Advisor Colin Powell, quote, would roll his eyes and say to his staff, 'Here come the little green men again.'"
Oh my God. I don't know much about Colin Powell, but I have a deep, soft spot for him, and I'm not sure why.
It's propaganda from when we were kids and they were getting ready for the Gulf War.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. But here's the thing that I love about this, right? Now, I don't know, but what we've got is confirmed Reagan saw a UFO on a flight. Confirmed Reagan asked Gorbachev if the Russians would defend us in an alien invasion. Confirmed Reagan referenced alien invasions at the UN, and confirmed Reagan has referenced alien invasions often enough that his staff were tired of it.
Yeah.
This kind of fits, though. If this guy saw a UFO once and couldn't stop thinking about it, he's having all these political discussions, we're on the brink of war, and he's like, but you guys, aliens are real. Yeah. One of them told me to stop being an actor.
Yeah.
Why are we not talking about
shit? It must be maddening.
Oh my God. Let's move forward a little bit. Let's talk about Clinton. Okay. So
is that forward?
I guess. I don't know. So Clinton had a chief of staff named John Podesta, who was also involved in the Obama administration. Now, Podesta is heavily involved in UFO stuff and even worked with Tom DeLonge, which we talked about way back at the start of the podcast. We are running out of time, so I will just refer you back to our Tom DeLonge episode if you want a little more info about how Podesta is involved in UFO stuff coming back to the forefront in 2017.
So it's wild to think about that was like our first episode, right? Or second or something.
I think second episode. Yeah, it was early days.
So this is like 2000. And Tom DeLonge, the Blink-182 guy, is involved in UFO stuff even back then, or was it just Podesta?
I don't think during the Clinton administration. DeLonge left Blink-182 in 2015, and that seems to be when he got heavily involved in this shit. The WikiLeaks emails that show us that he was in communication with Podesta as he was claiming date from 2015. So the timing kind of lines up there. And my understanding of Podesta is this was something he wanted to get done and was unable to get it done both during the Clinton administration and during the Obama administration, and is frustrated by that.
Got it. Okay.
Now, Clinton has publicly acknowledged that he tried to look into UFOs, but wasn't able to get any answers. From the Political article, when Webb Hubbell, Clinton's longtime friend, started as the Associate Attorney General, Clinton gave him specific marching orders. Webb, if I put you over at Justice, I want you to find the answers to two questions for me. One, who killed JFK? And two, are there UFOs? He was dead serious, Hubbell later wrote in his memoir. I had looked into both, but was not satisfied with the answers I was getting.
I kind of love that Clinton was a conspiracy theorist at heart. Those are not the questions I would ask the Associate Attorney General to do, but it feels very Clinton to me.
It feels very Clinton, right? Like Clinton was of the same generation as my parents, right? Like he was a boomer. He grew up in hippie times, right? Like his whole thing, like I didn't inhale. Like, yeah, okay, buddy, sure.
Yeah, sure he didn't.
But more to the point, that generation was dramatically shaped by the assassination of JFK, the reveal of CIA involvement in all sorts of heinous shit. And they were kind of the first generation who came in with a default distrust of the government line on stuff, especially JFK, where we know they covered some shit up. And UFOs, where it's pretty clear they covered some shit up. So it's like, it's that thing we've always talked about, right? Like once you crack the door to everything the government says isn't reliable, it's really hard to know where to stop. Yeah. So I totally buy that he came in and he's like, look, this isn't my top priority, but I want someone to, like, in theory, we have access. Go find out for me.
Yeah.
Now, speaking to a student who asked him about Roswell later, he said, No, as far as I know, an alien spacecraft did not crash in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. And Ryan, if the United States Air Force did recover alien bodies, they didn't tell me about it either, and I want to know.
You like almost hear his frustration. Like, they didn't tell me either.
Now, years later, while promoting his book, he was asked about UFOs on a morning show. And he said, there are things flying around up there that we have not fully identified yet.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty good confirmation by a president.
I remember that moment. And the thing that was interesting about it is before that point, either UFOs didn't come up at all, or if they came up, it was an obvious joke. It was a softball question to give the president an excuse to crack wise.
Right.
So for Clinton to just point blank to not laugh off the question was itself groundbreaking. He could have said no, but just by taking it seriously was itself a statement. And to then go into, I'm not saying it's alien, but there are things up there and we don't know what they are. That was wild. That like before 2017, with all the stuff coming out around ATIP and everything, things like that were huge. Like, I remember hearing that, like, holy shit, I can't believe he said that. And him and Obama have both done kind of the same thing. They've started dropping these little hints in interviews. They won't say it's aliens, but they'll absolutely like kind of lean on the idea UFOs are real, which, is a dramatic change from the past. Now,
it makes me wonder if Lou Elizondo is like quietly briefing them.
I wouldn't be surprised.
What you're gonna say?
Well, I mean, except we know he's not, right? Because Lou's whole thing is he resigned because he couldn't get the people above him to take it seriously and report it upstream. So speaking of Obama, similar thing on Jimmy Kimmel. He was asked if he ever looked into UFOs, and Obama did do the thing where he kind of laughs it off. He goes, I can't reveal anything. And Kimmel leans in. He goes, okay, because this is interesting, because Clinton says he did go looking and there was nothing. And Obama laughs and he says, well, that's what we're instructed to say.
Personally, I remember this, and it felt very authentic to me. But I kind of love Obama's trickster side, even if it's a little frustrating.
Chuck is reading ahead. I wrote that I was frustrated about it, and Chuck wrote in that he loves the trickster side. I think that's fair. It's a funny answer. My frustration stems from, for years, that was the only answer, was laugh it off. And this felt like the same thing. Like, I'll never tell, like either talk about it or don't, but teasing is so frustrating.
Yeah.
But I will give Obama full credit. A few years later, he gave a much better answer.
Yeah.
He was on James Corden's show and he was asked about the topic again. And he said, when I came into the office, I was like, all right, is there a lab somewhere where we're keeping the alien specimens and spaceship? And, they did a little bit of research and the answer was no. But what is true, and I'm actually being serious here, is that there's footage and records of objects in the sky that we don't know exactly what they are. We can't explain how they moved, their trajectory. They did not have an easily explainable pattern.
Yeah. I mean, I like Obama's trickster side, but I like his authentic, transparent side a lot better.
And we've talked a lot about, like, does this count as disclosure? Is this soft disclosure? Are they prepping us for the idea?
Yeah.
And I think there's a case to be made that the public has been increasingly normalized to the idea, where looking back to how they reacted in the 40s and 50s was the public is going to panic. We need to get a fucking lid on this thing right goddamn now. To now, we still aren't quite prepared to say it's alien, but we're able to come out and acknowledge, yeah, man, there's shit up there and we don't know what it is. And it gets back to the Pentagon statements in 2017 when, they're confirming these videos of anomalous sightings. And they say, we've looked into it. it's not ours and it's not our adversaries, but we don't know what it is. And it's so funny because they'll walk right up to the line, but they won't go over it. Like, if you don't know what it is, but it's not ours and it's not our adversaries, what does that leave, guys? Like, I get that you don't want to say it's alien, but like, if it ain't human, by definition, it's non-human.
Oh, I mean, it's just not, I don't know. I think that's normal. I feel like there's a whole lot of things it could be.
Sure. It could be swamp gas, temperature inversion, maybe Venus.
Yeah, possibly.
All right.
Us from the
Let's talk
future.
about the one we were all kind of dreading. There was another president after Obama. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, there's a couple. Yeah, but now, carry on.
Here's the thing. I will say what is interesting about this. Clinton and Obama do not say they were briefed on UFOs. Clinton and Obama say, I asked and was told, either told there's nothing there or told no. They were a little ambiguous about whether they were denied access to information that does exist or if there just is no information. But both of them are upfront about, I asked and could not get access to it.
Okay.
Trump, on the other hand, has repeatedly claimed that he was briefed on UFOs while president. There's a few incidents where he's done this. In an interview with George Stephanopoulos, he said, I did have one very brief meeting on it. Do I believe it? Not particularly.
I mean, I don't believe any quotes from Trump. So unless there's someone else who can verify that he was even there, like, no quote from Trump is going to do anything for me.
I don't blame you. In an interview with his son, Don Jr., his son asked him, come on, Dad, tell us about Roswell. And he did the thing that, that I'll never tell thing. He was like, no, I won't talk to you about what I know about it, but it's very interesting.
I don't know why Obama could say this exact same thing and I would find it charming. And when Trump does it, I want him to fall in a well.
It's almost like you have other associations with them as people, aside from their beliefs on UFOs.
Maybe. It's possible.
More recently, on a couple of podcasts, to podcaster Hugh Hewitt, I will tell you, I interviewed a couple of people from the Air Force, and these guys were central casting, perfect guys with their crew cuts, and they walked in, and they were handsome as hell, and I said, what do you think? And they believe it. I mean, they believe it. They said they saw it, and they're not the kind of guy that's going to lie.
The thing that weirds me out about this quote is like all of his, all of the adjectives he used to convey their trustworthiness are about their physical beauty.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. And especially, right, like these guys were central casting, right? Like he wants you to know this wasn't some schlub in a suit. He didn't meet with Fox Mulder. He met with an Air Force pilot and he had a suit on and he was trustworthy looking. And like, it makes you wonder how many things you could say to Donald Trump. And as long as you were wearing the right outfit, he's like, oh, it's good enough for me.
I mean, I don't even know if the outfit would matter as long as they're handsome.
Speaking of, on Logan Paul's podcast, Trump was asked about UFOs and he said, I met with pilots, like beautiful Tom Cruise, but taller, handsome, perfect people, not conspiratorial, not crazy. And they tell me stories that they've seen, things you wouldn't believe. They say, sir, there was something there that was round in form and going like 4 times faster than my super jet fighter plane. And they really meant it. Am I a believer? No, I can't say that I am. But I have met with people that are serious people that say there's a really strange things that they see flying around out there.
Like, did they have a rank? Did they have demonstrated successes? No, they're just handsome, perfect people. Yeah. Like, I suppose a lot of us are that way subconsciously, but at least we try to base it.
Doesn't filter. And it's whatever's in his head comes out. He's like, you would believe these guys too. There are 2 things he says that I think are interesting. One is he actually says something that we see a lot of people saying. What he's trying to get at here through his own weird, clumsy, homoerotic way is these were believable, credible witnesses. Trump, like the rest of us, grew up in the stew of debunked skepticism. Only yokels believe in UFOs. So I think what he's trying to express is he met with credible military witnesses and was genuinely surprised to hear that they believed there was something to it. That, I think, is the essence of the story, and I think there's something to it. The other thing is, he says he was briefed on UFOs, but then every time he tells the story, it was, I spoke to a couple dudes from the Air Force, and I would love to know, is this actually a briefing? Was this just a couple of guys he cornered in the hallway? Like, I would really love to know the context around. We don't get that from Trump, unfortunately. But part of the reason that I bumped this topic up in the list and made it happen is because in a very recent video, Ross Coulthart claims that Trump has been briefed and fears for his life if he reveals what he knows to the public. Now, Ross says, I've been told by 3 sources now that Donald Trump was briefed as president in early 2020 into what I'm talking about today. I'm told that he was given a qualified briefing, not as much as other presidents have been told, about the crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. Do you know what's going on? He's scared. He's scared they're going to kill him if he reveals what he knows. That's what I've been told. You have a situation where your potential president is terrified of speaking about the UAP issue because he's scared they're going to knock him. I'm not kidding you. I'm not making this up.
I'm willing to extend a lot of trust to Ross Coulthart. But personally, I find it very hard to believe that even the threat of death could get Trump to shut his mouth for a minute about some secret he has.
No, totally. If nothing else, he would be talking about the death threat. He'd be like, they pulled a gun on me. It was the biggest gun you've ever seen. It was very impressive, very shiny.
They were very handsome.
Handsomest guy. Put the gun to my head, said, don't tell anybody about this.
Really tall, like tall Tom Cruise.
The tallest guy. Also, funny thing, like beautiful Tom Cruise, but taller, what are pilots known for? It's not being tall.
No.
Cockpits are cramped. Literally, people are denied access to become Air Force pilots because they're too tall. Pilots are not tall.
Yeah.
Tom Cruise is a good type for a pilot.
Also, I kind of just love the jab, like Tom Cruise, but tall.
Yeah, like you can't help. Tom Cruise, he's great, but a little short.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay, so I think you see why I was a little hesitant to do this episode. It's a mess. It's an absolute mess. We have ranging from Truman in the very beginning with like well-documented and perfectly reasonable interest in, we're seeing reports that there's stuff up there and I should probably be briefed about it in case it's a threat. Yeah, I get that. Nobody's going to sneer at a president for thinking that. To the totally kooky stories about Eisenhower meeting aliens at an Air Force base while he was supposed to be quail hunting, and Richard Nixon taking Jack and Gleason to see the aliens one night. I hope those stories are true. They're awesome, but, they're a little wild. Up to, again, more well-documented things like Gerald Ford getting really upset about the swamp gas explanation and promising to be involved. We've got Carter campaigning on a promise to disclose the UFO stuff because he personally saw a UFO. We have Ronald Reagan, who at the very least has one documented UFO sighting and possibly was told by aliens to become president. That one's I don't blame you if you don't buy that part of it, but he definitely said that shit at the UN. He definitely told Gorbachev this shit. It was apparently well known enough that people rolled their eyes about it. He talked about it all the time. And then we've got Clinton and Obama both tried to get access to UFO stuff and were denied. And we've got a consistent narrative that Trump was at least briefed on the topic. Whether or not anything came of it, whether or not he actually fears for his life, we're hearing this from multiple places now. So I think the takeaway here is presidents have a non-zero level of awareness and involvement in UFOs.
Yeah.
And depending on where you want to look, there is some supporting evidence for the idea that we have heard from whistleblowers that at some point, the president was removed from the need to know list. During Truman's era, president was on the need to know list. At some point, that changed. And we've now gotten, if David Grush and other whistleblowers like him are to be believed, there is a very restricted group of people who are allowed to know the truth about the program and the phenomenon of non-human interactions with this planet. And apparently the president isn't on that list. Now, there's a bigger debate about whether the president should be all-knowing or not. I think it probably makes sense. There are some programs the president doesn't need to know about. At the end of the day, the idea that the president is a short-term political position is not wrong. I don't like it when people use that as a justification for icing the president out of decisions, but I get it. Like if you're running a deep black program that could easily be disrupted by the whims of a politician spilling it to the public because he might get more votes, I understand why you might think maybe maybe he just shouldn't know. And interestingly, I think I felt differently about this before Trump became president. If you had asked me before that, I think I would have been like, no, of course the president should know. After Trump, I'm like, yeah, I get it.
No.
There are things I would not want Trump to have known even while he was president. And as much as you hear about groups that did keep things secret for the president and just went rogue and were breaking the law, I'm like, I get it.
Yeah,
I would have too. But it kind of comes back to what Congress is saying. And what we're hearing from representatives like AOC, Tim Burchett, and even, fucking Chuck Schumer is it's not that this has been kept secret. It's that this has been kept secret inappropriately. There are proper methods and paths for things to be extremely restricted access. And at the end of the day, Congress, at least the Gang of Eight, is supposed to have access to everything. And if something has been improperly done from the Gang of Eight, from Congress, from the public, that's the thing they're concerned about. And as a public citizen, the part I care about is disclosure. I want to know the truth, but getting to a point where there was no longer an illegal cover-up and at least things are being dealt with appropriately in the proper chain of command would be a step forward. I want it to come out publicly, but at least I don't want it to be this weird situation where I wish I didn't find it plausible that there is a rogue group in the government and the DOD who's just keeping this shit secret because nobody can be trusted. I wish that didn't feel plausible to me.
Yeah, I guess I wish that we could get that same kind of budget guarantee for NASA.
Yeah.
No, stay out of this one. Let's just increase this every year forever.
No, 100%. Chuck and I were talking about this the other day. There was a very damning article that came about the, was it the Artemis launch system? And Chuck has some issues with the article that he was fair to point out. But what it boiled down to was NASA makes some very weird decisions that only make sense if you consider they're constantly at risk of their budget being disrupted. And programs that take longer than 4 years can be severely disrupted by an administration change. So if you have a program that's going to take longer than 4 years, you have to put some guardrails in place that'll help it survive that transition. And some of the decisions they make more sense in that context. So yeah, I totally agree. Our military can find infinite budget for anything they ever fucking want, robot dogs and robot ships and lasers and shit. NASA's like, can we have another 50 cents to make another rocket, please? And I totally agree. NASA should have a bigger budget.
One thing that article mentioned was the 4 F-35s that Congress didn't ask for, but are still on the budget anyways, which outrank the entire budget of NASA, are larger than. And it's like, nobody wants these, and yet, we're getting those.
Yeah, getting them. I don't care if you want them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild.
Oh my God. All right. Well, how do you feel about this, Chuck? Now you know what there is to know about presidents and UFOs. Do you think the presidents are briefed? Do you think they know what the fuck's going on?
No, I don't think they are. But the thing I find myself wondering at the end of this is like, well, I have two questions. One, are presidents more likely? Like, this is a lot of people all in one place, very public people who have UFO histories and sightings. Is this because they're very public, because they're future presidents, because, so that's my first question. And my second question is
it, do aliens take an interest in UFO in Republican politics?
No, but that's a good question. No, my second question is, why don't they have sightings after their presidency? They're like, oh yeah, we've seen so many of them now. It's like, I'm not going to talk about that. It's just secondhand now.
To quote President Obama, that's what we're instructed to say.
Yeah. Well, on that note.
All right. Thank you for joining us on another episode of It's a Very Exciting Time. You can find show notes and more on our website, veryexcitingtime.com, as well as links to our social media accounts.
And as always, you can email us at scottorchuck@veryexcitingtime.com. And if you'd like to support the show, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime.
And Chuck, as always, my wife thanks you for listening to me talk about UFOs so she doesn't have to.